Hi everyone, we're very excited to tell you about the new special issue in Critical Studies in Teaching and Learning. My name's Vivienne Bozalek.
And I'm Nikki Romano.
And we have co-edited the special issue together, following on from a conference that we ran last year together with other people on new materialism. It was the 10th New Materialism Conference, and the first time it was held in South Africa. That was in December 2019, and the conference was held at the University of the Western Cape. We decided that the theme of the conference would be Reconfiguring New Materialisms in Higher Education, because of the issues that were being experienced around the world at the time, but particularly in South Africa, regarding higher education.
The conference called for papers that responded to 6 streams. These were New Materialities, Decolonialities, and Indigenous Knowledges. The second was Slow Scholarship, and this was followed arts-based pedagogies, research, and hauntology in higher education. The fourth stream was neurotypicality, the undercommons, and higher education. The fifth, new materialist reconfigurings of methodology in higher education and beyond. The final stream called for papers on political ethics of care, new materialism, and just pedagogies. Of the 11 papers published here, 3 are from keynote speakers, 3 are from their respondents, and the remaining 5 are from presenters at the conference.
First paper in the issue is Erin Manning's paper entitled Radical Pedagogies and Metamodelings of Knowledge in the Making. She was a keynote speaker at the conference, and unfortunately she wasn't able to be there, but Nikki Romano, who was the respondent, Nikki sitting next to me here, read her paper, which she knew very well by the time she came to read that paper. Erin's paper is about addressing the theme of neurodiversity or neuroatypicality in higher education, a very important concept. She looks at alternative ways of doing radical pedagogies in the context of neuroatypicality, and she draws on the work of people like Loris Malaguzzi, Fernand Deligny, and Felix Guattari to look at alternative ways of doing pedagogy, and importantly at indigenous theorists who she says never leave behind the idea of neuroatypicality in their work. Nikki Romano's paper is entitled Thinking with Drawing, Wondering through Manning's text. It's a visceral enactment of what Manning is trying to put forward in her paper. Nikki experiments with Manning's text, returning to it a number of times and playing with the text in order to make sense of it. By playing with the text, Nikki made it possible to understand Manning's paper in different ways, and in engaging in such processes, it led her to empathize with her students and their experiences of coming into higher education as novices, and to think about how to engage such students in a radical pedagogy.
Vivienne Komalo's paper is entitled Place-Based Disruptions of Humanism, Coloniality, and Anti-Blackness in Early Childhood Education. She brings into conversation indigenous and black feminisms and feminist new materialisms in order to explore the possibilities for early childhood education that confronts anti-blackness, settler colonialism, and environmental precarity. Vigiele proposes testifying witnessing that simultaneously makes visible anti-blackness in environmental education whilst foregrounding ways in which black children's geographies affirm black life and place relations. Vigiele proposes speculative storytelling as an ethos of radical relationality that disrupts colonialist hierarchical understandings of what it means to be human through centering black futurity. She reconceptualizes radical relationality as a theory of change that is both an ethos and a pedagogical practice, and calls for pedagogies that enact relational, caring, and reciprocal ways of knowing and becoming with place, rather than those that reinforce human-centered and extractivist relations. In Sadiq Matala's response to Vigile's paper, he explores resonances between her early childhood storytelling pedagogical interventions with his teaching and learning practice. Guided by a post-humanist, vitalist, materialist conception of an affirmative ethics, together with students, Sadiq foregrounds pedagogical practices seek to strike a balance between the critique and resistance of the status quo, whilst simultaneously inspiring hopeful and sustainable futures. He argues that post-humanist and new materialist scholarship must start with a deep awareness of ethics and proposes situated storytelling as a counter-practice that allows for a portion of the curriculum to be dictated by students' own affects, intensities, and place-based knowledges.
The third paper in the special issue is also based on a keynote presentation, and it's by Liz de Freitas. The paper's entitled Why Trust Science in a Trickster World of Absolute Contingency, the Speculative Side of Mathematical Modeling. In this paper, she engages with current concerns about how an emphasis on relationality, while seemingly generative in new materialism, can also involve a dangerous overreach and imposition of one's own images, understandings, ontological practices onto others. A second limitation that she identifies in new materialism, in its focus on relational ontologies, is that it proposes a ground-up agential practice, which she says might not be adequate for understanding the nature of abstraction and practices of abstraction, which she argues are in fact fruitful, but often get banished as the baddie in new materialism. These concerns are linked to the increasing embrace of the notion of contingency as inherent to relational ontology, and as crucial for philosophical foundational movements such as agential realism, proposed by Karen Berard. The emphasis on contingency contests modernity's or humanist emphasis on control, natural law, and human will. De Freitas examines how we come to understand a world of absolute contingency, where the non-human trickster activities of a more than human ecology are at play, and how scientific empiricism might respond productively to this. She uses science fiction and particularly alights on one science fiction novel, which is called The Three-Body Problem, to think with philosophically and methodologically the complexity of what a non-human science could look like and what is the nature of trust in science by humans. The paper concludes with the lessons learned from looking at linking the abstract in the form of mathematics as a form of speculative power in the world, invoking Deleuze in how we have to learn to affirm all of chance and the workings of chance in a creative way. Delphi Carstens was the respondent to Liz's paper and found himself to be really inspired by her work. He has long been concerned with the dichotomy between speculative realism and new materialisms, which de Freitas' paper deals with. He takes this further, purporting that new materialisms tend to ignore the dark, equivocal, and ambiguous nature of materiality. Carstens believes that science fiction is able to get into this equivocal nature of materiality, and it is also able to deal with the real issues of the era. His paper is entitled Towards a Pedagogy of Speculative Fabulation, and in the paper he engages with consciousness and cognitive science differently in embodied ways where uncertainty resides. Carstens explores a pedagogy of bewilderment and affect. He explores what new materialism has to say about consciousness and consciousness studies. Neuroatypicality is also important, according to Carstens, for thinking otherwise. He turns to science fiction, which according to him has dealt extensively with neuroatypicality.
Dirk Postma's paper is entitled Spatial Enactments in Emancipatory Higher Education Pedagogies. In this paper, Dirk offers a diffractive reading of Rancière's critical pedagogy through mole and law spatial typology, so as to explore how the performance of spaces might affect higher education emancipatory learning. Dirk argues that by reconceptualizing the educator as part of the heterogeneous agency of spatial assemblages, the focus shifts from the human agents, educator and student, towards the enactments with and through educational spaces. Thinking with Rancière's notion of an intelligent aesthetics of dissential politics that is underpinned by an assumption of equal intelligence of all, Postma explores pedagogical relations whereby emancipatory educators enable students to exercise their intelligence by igniting their courage and will to know differently from imposed forms of knowledge. In so doing, the author argues the entanglements between spatial interferences and Rancière's critical pedagogy enable multiple divisions of the sensible that simultaneously have the potential to disallow epistemic obedience and challenge Western hegemonic discourse. The arts-based pedagogies research and hauntology stream of the conference invited scholars to submit papers that explore effective and ethical possibilities that arts-based research and pedagogies offer scholarship and teaching learning in higher education. In response to this call, Elmarie Costandius, Imelda Brandt, and Gerard de Villiers' paper, which is entitled Redress at a Higher Education Institution, Art Processes and Embodied Learning, explores the effective capacity of arts-based practice and performance to trouble unequal social and political power relations within the university town of Stellenbosch in South Africa. Drawing on a series of workshops with community members, students and lecturers, the authors explore how working with art processes might become a new means of doing research in education, the humanities and social sciences. In particular, they make visible how art practice and performance were used as processes with which to explore and experiment with issues such as inclusion, transformation and decolonization in order to redress exclusion and assimilation. In their article entitled On Our Common Passions, Entanglements of Research, Teaching Practices and Institutional Lives, Macarena Garcia-Gonzalez and Justina Desch-Trubczak offer an account of their ongoing collaborative exploration of how posthumanist and feminist material concepts offer an account of their ongoing collaborative exploration of how posthumanist and feminist material concepts and ideas have reshaped their research and methodological approaches to children's literature scholarship, as well as their institutional lives in higher education. Drawing on the propositions of slow scholarship and responsible pedagogies, the authors propose a deep engagement with the entanglements of thinking, feeling, teaching, learning, and critical creative as continuums that may open spaces for new modes of knowledge production that resist the pressure of neoliberal and positivist academia. Resisting the conventions and codes of the academy, the authors resist concluding their open-ended conversation and seek instead to provoke ongoing debates about research and teaching practices in their field from other scholars' variously situated standpoints and perspectives.
The final two papers in the special issue pertain to slow scholarship. Anne Reinitzen's paper on digital slow, Brahmanism, zetetic wild science, and pedagogics directly addresses these neoliberal trends through what she calls Brahmanization. Her paper argues that the current digital society and education systems are both produced and constrained within these powerful political discourses. Through her critique of discursive productions of policies, Reinitzen proposes that digitalization and/or education should be collectively produced through zetetic or curious wild science, productive doubts, and slow scholarship. The last paper in the special issue, entitled Sympoiesis, Becoming with and through each other, exploring collaborative writing as emergent academics, is by Karen Collette, Caroline van den Berg and Belinda Verstey, and it narrates the journey of these three academics who see themselves as emergent writers of scholarly publications. They all think with the work of Donna Haraway, Joan Tronto, Corinne Barad and slow scholarship writers to consider how questions which were posed in the sub-theme of the slow scholarship at the conference could be answered. Questions like how can feminist new materialisms help us in thinking about pleasure in academic settings, and how would slow scholarship affect how we do pedagogy, writing, publishing and reviewing in higher education. The article provides an example of how important a continuing and rhythmic slow scholarship is for sustaining pleasure and creativity in the process of writing.
As co-editors and members of the organizing committee of the 10th New Materialism Conference, we're very excited to have these 11 papers published in Critical Studies in Teaching and Learning. The papers offer a wide range of views pertaining to new materialisms and how these might be used and read in the current context of higher education. For readers who are au fait with new materialist ideas, there are some cutting-edge papers by the authors of the special issue, and for those who are not so familiar, there are also some papers which clarify concepts used in new materialism, often found to be difficult for those not steeped in this literature. We are also delighted that many of the authors have done video clips elaborating on the key ideas and themes of their written papers, as hearing what the authors are trying to put across to their audience tends to make the writing more accessible and understandable. We hope you enjoy the issue.
Thank you.
Thanks.